Hello, and welcome to Fresh Fusion, a weekly show where we discuss the business, the art, the ethics of content creation on the open web. My name is Jared White, and this is episode 66. Welcome to the new normal. Same as the old normal? I hope not. That's what this episode is about today. I will try to keep it short. This has been a very stressful last week or two for me. I've just had a lot going on, a lot on my plate. I almost didn't even sit down to record this episode this week. But I just couldn't stay away from you all. So here I am. And today's topic was precipitated by an article I was reading about a town in California that I used to spend some time in, Berkeley, California. And here's the interesting thing about Berkeley. You hear about Berkeley, California, and it makes you think of, lots of things that happened, say, back in the 60s, lots of liberal hippie kind of things that were going on. And people think of Berkeley as a liberal California Bay Area sort of place. But it turns out, like so many places in America, things I knew nothing about until much more recently, Berkeley has had racist policies at the very heart of its city for a long, long time. And they're just finally now doing something about it. What I'm talking about, and you can read about this in a link I'll put in the show notes, is they're finally changing some of their zoning laws so that multi-family dwelling units can be built in areas that historically have been zoned only for single-family homes. Now, single-family homes have been a staple of modern American suburbia for a long time now. But as it turns out, Berkeley, California was actually the first city in the country, apparently, to create new zoning laws specifically to create entire neighborhoods of only single-family homes. And the reason for this was, this should not come as a shock. The reason for this was because they wanted to create affluent neighborhoods filled with white people and get rid of all the riffraff. In other words, all the non-white people. Yes, my friends, single-family home zoning laws, as it turns out, are just another example of systemic racism. Now, again, I knew nothing about this until fairly recently. I was ignorant of all these things. All I knew is that there's, long been this tussle of, zoning neighborhoods as only for single-family homes versus building more denser housing. And it's usually framed in this sort of typical conservative liberal sort of thing of like, the liberals just want to build a bunch of stuff all packed together because it, helps them fill some kind of quota around, the demographics of this area, and so they can pat themselves on the back. And meanwhile, it just creates worse neighborhoods. And that's a conservative position, right? Like it's my American right to live in a neighborhood where there's nice homes all spread out with big yards and stuff. That's the American dream, with your white picket fence and your lawnmower and your 2 kids and a dog and a cat and all that stuff. Of course, then the flip side of that argument is, you evil conservatives trying to maintain your racist white neighborhoods. We need to build denser housing that's affordable housing and create more diverse demographics and so forth. Well, without sounding like I'm coming too hard down on any one side, that's kind of true. It's actually kind of true. Like, as much as someone, and I used to think this way, I no longer do, but as much as someone might like this idea of, a nice upscale neighborhood with big lawns in the front and nice looking homes all spread apart with enough area to, spread out with your lawn chairs and your backdoor barbecues and your swimming pools and whatever else things you put on your property. As much as it seems like that's a nice place to live, that's not a place a lot of people can live in. It's actually not a place a lot of people want to live in, as it turns out. And so, you see places like Berkeley now, and Portland's been through this already. Where I live now in Portland, there's already been this battle against, NIMBY, not in my backyard. Policies that, prevented building denser housing, out in neighborhoods that historically had been only single family homes. There's already been that debate, and the denser housing debate has already won, and that's already happening now in Portland. And, some people are grumpy about it, but the reality is it's actually in the long run creating better neighborhoods, because the alternative is what I saw growing up in Santa Rosa. In Santa Rosa, California, I grew up literally thinking, and I know this is going to sound bad. This is going to sound really bad. But I literally grew up thinking that living in an apartment meant you were, working a crappy job and came from a sketchy background, and maybe you were still doing sketchy things like dealing drugs or whatever. Apartments aren't great, right? And if you can buy a condo, that's a little bit better. But if you can buy your own house, that's the pinnacle. Like, if you can afford to purchase your own home in a nice neighborhood, that means you're crushing it. You're living at the top of your game. That's the place to be, in a nice neighborhood, in a single family home. And, the more you don't have to deal with those apartment people, the better. That was what I grew up thinking. That was just the thinking. I don't know if it was anything my parents specifically said. It's not like they came up to me one day and said, "Son, you must realize that people that live in apartments are on a lesser plane than you are." No, that never happened. But it was just sort of assumed. And, our ultimate goal in life, apparently, was to purchase a home, a single family home in a nice neighborhood. Like that's what you do. And, you do whatever you can to avoid having to downgrade to a little apartment unit somewhere in an apartment complex. So, I had that whole concept growing up, had no idea just how racist and how classist a lot of this thinking was. And I ended up, owning my own home and living in my own home in suburbia. And I talked a little bit about that in my last episode, how miserable I ended up. So I'm not going to go into all that now. But suffice it to say, eventually moving up here to Oregon and the Portland area, a curious thing happened. Initially, we moved to a town called Hillsboro, which is about 30 minutes drive west of Portland. And we're in a position where, all we could do was to just get an apartment unit somewhere. And we discovered that in Hillsboro, there are really nice apartments in really nice neighborhoods. And the kind of people that live in these apartments, it was pretty diverse. In fact, because of the large presence of companies like Intel in the area, there's several large Intel factories. There are a lot of people who had immigrated from India or other places in Asia. So there's actually a large immigrant population. And they're living in these apartments and, presumably working at Intel or Nike or some other company like that. So it was just such an interesting shift in thinking, like, oh, we're in this nice neighborhood. We live in these nice apartments. There's people here from all over the world. My children get to interact with folks who, have different backgrounds and different cultures and, speak a little bit differently than they're used to. And it was so cool. It was so cool to have this experience of diversity after living in single family home white suburbia, where the only people you ever see or talk to basically are the people that look and sound just like you. And just, being in an area where apartments and homes weren't just code for if you're upper class or lower class. It was really surprising. And then I come to Portland itself, living near downtown. And, here, I'm living in an apartment, but I feel like I'm living in a hotel, a nice fancy hotel near downtown. And that's great. And I love it. So, I guess the point I'm trying to make here is, I grew up just woefully ignorant of how problematic policies seemingly as simple as how you zone for houses. I grew up woefully ignorant of, the history of these things, the backstory of these things, how neighborhoods were created specifically to encourage segregation, how zoning laws were specifically created to weed out the undesirables. This is part of the fabric of this country. And I'm not saying this as a progressive. I'm not saying this to support a particular policy or to bash a particular policy. I'm simply explaining to you the historical facts of systemic racism in our country, in America. And, if you're listening to this from another country, maybe it's different there. Hopefully it's different there. But I'm just telling you what it's like here, particularly in, Western U.S., where, so many policies were created, around the turn of the 20th century. And, just look at Oregon in general, like the state of Oregon, again, like nowadays people think of Oregon as a place of progressivism, but, the roots of Oregon are deeply racist. I mean, it used to be embedded into the fabric of the Oregon state laws to discriminate heavily against African Americans. Blacks need not apply in Oregon was the name of the game for a long time. It's just frustrating to me that, so much of this wasn't something I was aware of or knew about for much of my life. I don't know, maybe chalk it up to the fact that I was homeschooled and, even though I appreciate what my parents did for me, they had their biases, and the materials we read, a lot of which came, from Christian homeschooling publication sources, and they had their biases. And so, this stuff was just never communicated to me. So here I am in the year 2021, as this pandemic is, raging on, but hopefully on its last legs. And we're looking at, hope in the form of vaccines and herd immunity and all that. And people are talking about, how do we get back to normal, or, talking about the new normal, whatever that is. And on one level, yeah, I just want to go back to normal. I just want to go back to my normal happy life of working on my laptop in a nice cafe in a cool city and getting fun stuff done and meeting with creative entrepreneur types and, doing all this stuff. But there's a part of me now that's like, given everything that happened last year, to showcase just how screwed up politics have become in America, given everything we've seen about the breakdown of civil society and very nearly losing democracy, I can't ever go back to that normal. I can't ever go back to the normal of just having blinders on and not seeing what I've seen. I can't unsee systemic racism. I can't unsee, classist politics. I can't unsee dysfunctional government. I can't unsee, policies that hurt minorities and immigrants and, people of different, gender identities or sexual orientations than myself. All of the ways that, the seedy underbelly of the American system was revealed last year. I can't unsee all those things. I just can't. So, yes, of course, I want the pandemic to be over. I want to travel more. I want to meet cool, creative people. I want to work on my laptop and drink a latte. But I'm also thinking through, what are some things that I can do practically to, speak out against injustice, to, contribute meaningfully in some way, whether that's money, whether that's time, in the form of volunteerism. What can I do to make a little bit of a dent in all of these problems where before I was just, living in a state of blissful ignorance? What can I do to, enact some sort of meaningful change, even if that's just for one person or two people or three people? Obviously, I don't have the knowledge or the ability to, enact meaningful change, even at a city level, yet alone a state or national level. I'm not a politician. But, beyond just mere, voting whenever there's an opportunity to vote for something, beyond just, the very basics of participating in our democracy, what can I do to meaningfully make a difference for the better? So that's the question I have here as I look at, the rest of this year and coming out of this pandemic and what this new normal might be. I just, I don't want to squander this opportunity. As awful as the pandemic has been, as awful as this, this lockdown and everything that's happened, as awful as that all is, I also want it to be an opportunity to learn, to grow, to engage, intelligently with some of these issues that have come up. Because it would be a real shame if everything truly went back to normal and I was just, living in this state of being blind to the plight of those around me who are less fortunate than myself. All right. That sounds like such a soapbox. And somebody could easily accuse this of just being nothing but virtue signaling. So, I realize the slight absurdity of this whole episode, but I just want you to know, I'm just being completely honest here. I just want you to know this is where my headspace is at. This is where my thinking is. And, this is what I do when when I'm in my apartment with nothing else to do than to think. Apparently, this is what I'm thinking about. All right, I'm curious what your perspective is. What do you think this crazy last year has been in terms of maybe opening up your eyes to some things you didn't realize or know about before? What are ways where you feel like you might be able to make a difference in some positive way? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please email me, jared@jaredwhite.com, or find me on Twitter, jaredcwhite. I'd love to hear your thoughts. All right, that's it for today's episode. Thanks for tuning in to Fresh Fusion, and until next week, bye-bye.